Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad that you led by that. You were actually one of my, let's say, in the first 25 guests I ever had on the Multifamily Collective, you were in that group.
Wow.
So it's been some time, and I'm glad to have you back as well. This is fantastic.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, so you and I had the privilege and the opportunity to attend Cultivate 2025, as powered by the National Apartment Association this past week. We're going to dive into that in a little more depth. But before we do, you've been associated with Cultivate for a number of years now. Can you just kind of speak broadly about the experience, and talk to the audience a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So this was Cultivate number three. And so this year, it held true to what Cultivate is about. It is a peer to peer learning experience for executive leaders. And it's really incredible and truly one of my very favorite conferences of any that I go to or participate in because you're given some great information based on industry speakers and leaders and those who are expert in their field. But then you have dialogue and conversation with peers who do what you do, who lead from a different level and have to think of things holistically as well as from a leadership perspective. And so the conversations, the dialogue, the connections are unmatched.
Yeah, I will tell you, I was a first time attendee and participant, both in the we'll talk about, maybe I'll have you also unpack what a campfire, what a fishbowl, and what a traditional session is
Absolutely.
for everybody. Maybe we'll do that before we lead in. But as a first time participant, I was just blown away by the intellectual capital, the presentation power, the hallway conversations or water cooler conversations. It was just, to your point, a whole other level of experience as it relates to a conference. Just blown away.
Yeah, so good.
Okay, so I had never heard of a fishbowl before. So there are several different formats or forums for discussion. Can you sort of unpack those for us before we dive into the actual sessions themselves?
Absolutely. And I'm passionate about all of these. Fishbowl is my favorite. It's been a big part of my career, both at Cultivate and in AA Apartmentalize in using Fishbowl. I will say what makes it so special is it's a circle within a circle. So it's just the way to have a conversation and the way to get others involved in the conversation. So typically you have a couple facilitators in the center of the bowl with some open chairs. They set up a conversation, they bring forward some data, they share the topic and kind of the subcategories of the topic, and then you just have a conversation. So it starts with those that are in the direct center, those kind of panelists or facilitators that you would normally expect, but there's open chairs and people come in and out of those chairs to share their lived experience. So they speak from first person present, and it's really amazing, particularly when you have folks who have a lot to share and a great amount of expertise. It gives different voices and what I always love, point and counterpoint. So Fishbowl is the primary facilitation technology, as they call it, that we use at Cultivate. There's then Campfire, which would seem at first like a small panel per se, but then you have conversations at the tables where everyone reacts to and shares and brings forward their information and again, lived experience, their point of view, and then you take that back into a debrief so that everyone gets to learn from each other.
I got to tell you, the fishbowl was intimidating. In it's a beautiful description. When you are, do you call the lead fish the facilitator in a fishbowl? Is that the okay? So being a fishbowl,
Typically, yeah. Mhm.
yeah. So maybe we'll save that until we get down to one of our topics, because I had the great honor of facilitating one of the fishbowls, and I will say it was intimidating, but highly rewarding. Um, okay, I want to jump in. Sarah Ross was the keynote speaker at the conference this year, and I just love to hear you talk to the take maybe the whole experience, but maybe some of the takeaways that Sarah communicated in her session.
Absolutely. I mean, Sarah's overall premise is the lead full way. So being leaders who are full, and when you are full yourself, and that means well rounded, with great intention and being aware of yourself and others. So it really goes back a lot to some of the emotional intelligence conversation that you and I had all those many months ago. And it means, checking yourself, knowing what you bring to the table, being aware of others, and then being intentional about your life and your leadership. Because when we're running on empty, we're not our best selves, right? And we're going to
Yes.
misstep, we're going to be triggered, it's going to be hard. So she did a great job of kind of grounding us in kind of some core thoughts in terms of how to be more aware of ourselves and our actions, and then be able to be support to people. Because, um, one of her lines is, when people feel valued, they bring value, right? So that's a real simple ism that I think was great, and also as a trigger for ourselves when we think about emotional intelligence and not confusing, you know, tough problems with making problems tough. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of a leader perspective and how we do it. And so she talked about both, all three things: generalize, magnify, and awfulize. And that's kind of the worst of how to lead through problems. So, the generalize is the sky is falling everywhere kind of moment. And, just big swaths of everyone feels this way. And this is, and that also leads into that magnification when it feels like it's a problem that's everywhere present versus targeted with targeted solutions. And then the awful eyes we can all relate to. We're having a bad day. This is just the worst. This is over. You know, it's all blown to hell or whatever we want to say. It's really interesting. So how do we awfulize something? Because one of her stories that she spoke about is turbulence on an airplane, and you see the steward, and you can see their face, and when it gets really bumpy and really bad, everybody looks. And I've done that as much as we fly. I've definitely on some of the flights that are the worst. I'm like, are they scared yet? Should I be
Right.
worried? So she spoke about that. And I
Yeah.
think just the crystallization of remembering that during the toughest times, our people, the people we work with, and certainly if you're a leader leading teams, they look to you. Are you
That's right.
scared? Is it awful? What's your face look like? And sometimes our face, tells the story no matter what's coming out of our mouths. So it's a holistic, how do we lead and not awfulize?
So true. I remember you shared a quote many, many years ago. People don't, I'm going to butcher this, but people don't hear what you say until they know how you care or something of that nature. And I think it is just that. It's just as much about verbalizing things as it is about your body language and how you show up with presence and command, and not in a weird way, but certainly
Yeah.
people look to you for their own confidence sometimes. So, yeah,
Yeah.
Sarah was awesome. She did a great job. And we'll obviously link up all this stuff in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Sarah, you'll have the opportunity to do that there. I want
Great.
to shift gears. Let's talk about AI in the wild, wild west in multifamily. AI is everywhere.
Mhm.
Tell us your take.
This was actually one of my favorite sessions, and there were multiple sessions on AI and technology at Cultivate. I think we're seeing that at all of our industry events, is that everyone's talking about AI. And, this particular session was specific about two things. One, making sure that you have a plan, that you have to have an executive plan and an executive strategy for AI. And I think that organically and for good reason, most organizations don't. Because they started just what's on the shelf. Who did I see on the showroom floor at Apartmentalize? Who did I meet at OpTech? I mean, there's various things that happen. And so we were very vendor driven, which is fine. Vendors are wonderful. We need them. We need these beautiful tools, but we could cobble together things or try things. And it just seemed like there wasn't a lot of strategy behind what will we use and for what purpose and who should use it and what happens to the information. I mean, all the things that we can fear on the back end of dumping everything into ChatGPT. And we've seen lawsuits about this and some real challenges in the bigger world at large. But I would just say, I thought that they did a great job of just talking about this kind of giving everyone in the room a 30-day goal to create some kind of guardrails and structure to a strategy. And especially the audience in the room are leaders and those that have ability to get the right people in the room to do that. And I think that was urgent. So for listeners, if you don't know your organizational's AI strategy, or if there's not one that exists, I think it's time to circle the thought leaders and make it happen. And then there's, of course, the repercussions around it. We also heard in second to that some really great tools, which I won't name here per se as to leave one out or give one extra shine, but there were some really great tools that they were using to help understand the customer, to certainly be that nice handoff to the human element and the human aspect, which we always need. And our industry is still people serving people, but we now do it in a more effective and efficient way, particularly with AI. But there's always the caution of junk in, junk out, and making sure that we're testing what we think. Um, and that was a theme throughout many of the sessions on AI and technology is it's not a set it and forget it or a pull it and use it and think it's going to do what you want it to do. But I was highly encouraged listening to true panelist stories and best case kind of scenarios as to certain tools that were really helping to dramatically increase one in the sales process, our closing ratios and landing more leases, and on the resident side, better retention. And so there are a lot of tools out there, and that might be another episode. You'll find a way to do that. But I think that that would be really interesting. And then making sure that there's then the governance policy. So there's the strategy of what are we really chasing, what do we want, and what AI is going to get us there, and how will it engage with what we already have. And this is the biggest problem in technology regardless. Are we able to go one-stop shop, which a lot of the big operational platforms would love us to do? And that doesn't usually always work. You've got to integrate something into it, but do they talk to each other? How does that work? How do we get information out of it? So um, are we building a complex network of systems, or are we able to more strategically think about it?
Yeah, I think those are all very good points, and I think another that was really, apparent to me is that in terms of governance, internal governance, obviously, but just understand that even if your team members are not or uh, they're operating within your guidance and your governance, they're also going home at night and or picking up their phone and using the using AI with your potentially with your data. So just be real clear about that in terms of guardrails and governance is super important. It's changing
Absolutely. And
every
just to remember, if you don't say something, if there's not a governance, you've not given any clarity to your employees. And, this isn't yet the Gen Z conversation, but it was also discussed there. You're talking to and about our growing workforce, our largest, most fast growing members to our workforce, and they're all digital natives, and not just digital, but they've lived most of their lives, including their schooling, their university, online. They're used to using quick tools. They already knew ChatGPT. I mean, they already used it every day. And so coming to work and not saying, use this, not this, or do this, but not that. If you're not clear, it's not even their fault. I mean, there's a
That's right.
lack of clarity, and that's a tool that they just built into their whole way of life.
I think that's a great segue for this next, the blame game accountability culture, session. Why don't you talk us through that
Yeah.
one?
That was another really good one. I mean, and again, I will go back to the structure of Cultivate at large. These are not talking heads, right? And I think that's the best part of this conference at large. Even our keynote speaker, Sarah, as we were discussing, she was putting us into conversation groups and doing work during a keynote, which doesn't always happen. But it's more
That's
important,
right.
how do we use what we're hearing? And I think that's what's so special about Cultivate. And so this conversation certainly had folks who knew very well the topic. They talked specifically about three major types of accountability. So it's policy based, results based, and then trust based. And so policy based, that feels like what's always been, right? I mean, I don't think that's mystery. Um, do this, don't do this. Here are the rules. Here's the regulation. Here's HR. Here's the accountability. So I think that that works. We know that can work, but we also know the downsides. We know that one very, very well. That's kind of how we've all grown up, myself included. And when something is too punitive or when something feels outdated or outmoded, it's problematic. So just policies, unless they're really kept fresh for the times and really have some interesting guardrails and then also examples, because I think it's getting more complex, AI being one of them, by the way. We just talked about that. So I feel like that's really interesting. Um, and then the results by time. And so looking at how much am I producing in a certain amount of time, this was, one again, I think we're used to in project based work. I mean, I think a lot of our work, um, depending on how you serve and work in the industry, but even if you're doing traditional roles as regional managers, community managers, you have project based work. If you're on site, you certainly in maintenance, you've got project based work. So
Right.
that's the other kind of accountability model of looking at what does this person A do and what does this person B do in that amount of time. And so that's another one I think we're pretty familiar with, but we have to be very careful on how we're holding people accountable. Is it really an apples to apples comparison? Or is the situation, the building, the age of something, as we know, apples to oranges? I think that's very different. Um, and so, lastly, when we talk about the trust based, of course, that allows for the most empowerment. And that can be very scary to leaders. And they took that on and people discussed it because that means that, Mike, I know you. I've set out a course. I trust that you're going to do what you say. But as a leader, it also means you're going to know that and trust what I say. So if
Mm.
in this fake scenario, I was your leader, I would have to make sure that I was clear and I held up my end on follow up and accountability and guardrails. So it wasn't the final day something's due or some work that needs to happen. And I show up all of a sudden and what happened? Nothing's done, or this is all wrong. And we blow it all up versus as a leader, have some milestone check ins, find a way to both empower and then recognize. I mean, the check ins, I think, also for some of us, depending on our generations, have always felt a little more punitive than supportive. And I feel like that's kind of another interesting thing to think about with building trust is I'm checking in to be helpful. I'm checking in to test thinking. I'm checking in to ask deeper questions
Mm.
as your leader. And I think that automatically builds trust. And with that trust and those kinds of check ins that are not just, what are you not doing? What's going wrong? I mean, we want to know what's going wrong, but clearly the intention is to support you, to help you, to be support kind of up a chain where maybe we need more stakeholders involved, et cetera. So it really is the best way when we think about it, but it's also the scariest way when you think of leaders who don't want to take their hands off the wheel, and also don't do the work in between
Mm.
assigning or doing something and then just showing up for the party. That's not trust based. I think there's some trust in it, and I then think there's some abandonment in it. So it's trust and the old trust but verify. Don't let the verify be punitive. Let it be supportive.
There's a great testament that comes to mind for me that involves you as it relates to this topic. I had the honor of speaking with you on stage last, or maybe it was 2 years ago at NAA, and your pre-session prep work was spot on. You put out a topic, you gave us a framework to work within. I think we had 3 meetings, maybe 4 prior to the presentation on the day of. And to me, that's a great testament to everything that you just talked about it in terms of trust. You gave us an assignment, we walked away, we came back to the table. Where are you at with that? There was some work in between conversations, but you do that very well for whatever that's worth to you.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel good that it lands that way. That's the intention, right? But this is the feedback that I need to know that that's working. So that's great.
It's
Appreciate it.
great. Had the I've been able to speak on a lot of panels, but in the prep work is all over the board. Yours is very structured, and I appreciate it as someone that just wants to show up and be prepared to honor you, but honor the audience as
Yeah.
well. So, all right, let's segue to tech fatigue. This is the one where I had the assignment to lead a fishbowl. So neither had I seen a fishbowl, and neither had I led a fishbowl until this day. So anyway, I thought it was a
You did a
fantastic.
great job. I'm going to interject. I mean, for a first time fishbowl specifically, no one would have known that was your first fishbowl, other than I think you mentioned it at the end, which was nice. Everybody's like, wow, very impressive. But yes, great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was very stressful, but it was a lot of fun and very rewarding at the end. So we talked about tech fatigue, and I think as it relates to all of this stuff that may be leading up to the session, that we've talked about so far, there is a real tax and weight on people as it relates to technology, not just in a business. I heard someone say we had like upwards of 15 or 20 logins or different systems that we use in our property management company. But outside of the property management industry, in your own life, you're on Instagram or LinkedIn and other platforms. And so you may have a smart home, you may have all of this stuff, right? That is just
Yeah.
technology or driven by technology, and there's a real fatigue, or at least I feel it. So that's what the session was about. I'm curious from your vantage point, you were in the outer circle of the fishbowl, but you came down and jumped in. What were your takeaways?
Well, I think you named one of them that was overwhelming to me. I mean, I, I think you just said 20 or 30 or 50. I mean, some people said 50 or plus logins. And I've got to go and find one person in specific who I know said that, because I just want to know what are all of those. Now, there's so many that I already know that are too many, but this is going back to that tech strategy and tech stack and
Mhm.
all those things from a technological point of view you have to consider in order to make sure that you're putting something together that's not randomly cobbled together, which is what happens. And I mean, not to shame anyone, I've been a part of building those same kinds of tools
Yeah.
because things come about at different times in iteration. This year it's this, next year there's something else that you need that there's technology for. So I think that's part of it. Is there's not a single sign on in most cases for a lot of these tools, particularly as they get more cobbled together without a strategy. And that is, I mean, I think I heard almost predominantly there were two major real stressors. So we're starting with this one. And that was really huge for everyone in the room and for the people that work with them, because I don't know how you keep up with all those sign-ons. I'm getting older. I mean, I know I've got them written somewhere if I'm doing 50, but I've just got to say that's a lot of sign-ons. So um I think, again, being thoughtful and integrating, and then again, this is the magic of Cultivate, and we're naming it right here. You don't get one pass at this. One session is on this, one session is on that. They overlap in the middle. You get to test it in real world thinking. So that's what we're doing here, speaking about sessions and now your fishbowl, and people got to bring that to the table. And so that was it. I think it was the fatigue of kind of cobbling together systems, all the sign-ons, and the problems that come with cobbling together systems, which I spoke about earlier on another session, in terms of just sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Sometimes you can't get information out of one system and into the other one effectively where it's easily usable and digestible and all those good things. So I feel like that's another real area. And then that main conversation that came out after tech fatigue specifically was tech and centralization. So making
Mhm.
sure that some of the fatigue was the stops and starts of assuming one thing about using tech for centralization and having one outcome versus another. So um, folks just talking about what makes it harder. And this kind of training that is required when you are both going for efficiency and effectiveness, which we need both. And certainly that's kind of anything centralized. That's the goal. How do we be even more efficient, more effective? Where are the handoffs? How do we have a human experience using this from, AI to human to our human customer? Like, how does that feel? There's so much at play there. And I heard a lot about getting the handoffs wrong and also the training. Like it's a one and done. I'm out. You got the training. Go do it. Which is, having been someone who led L&D for years in my career at one point, it's always been that way. They want to stand up in one meeting, do one training, and then everybody's got it. But if you have 30, 40% turnover, or it's been a couple months, people don't know what they're doing. You got to say it again. You got to build uh, some other opportunities into the system.
Yeah, that's so right. I heard a wonderful quote before we move on to the next topic. Again, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it was a CEO and he was speaking about communication. And he said, look, you have to say it to the point of ad nauseum. And then and only then are you starting to communicate. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Because our
Right.
just humans,
Can't
there's
say it
so
enough.
much distraction in the world that you just have to say it over and over before it imbues in people's minds. But
Hmm.
Gen Z, to your point, biggest cohort coming into the workplace in, I guess, probably since Gen X or baby boomers. And I think it's baby boomers. But talk to us about that session. That seemed to be, at least from my perspective, it was kind of the buzz of the event, the Gen Z conversation.
Yeah, what was so great about that is we had, a Gen Z panelist and being interviewed by a millennial. And then, it was data shared clearly, but also kind of first person present, someone in the industry who could talk about their experience, their motivators, kind of what their cohorts motivators are. And, having been someone who's done so much work and even had senior, titles within HR, I'm not new to the idea of Gen Z and also the difference by generation, although there's no generation that's all one thing. But there are just some trends. And I spoke about one of those a moment ago, which was to say they're already digital natives and they
Right.
already know how to work alone, but they value efficiency in interesting ways. So one of my biggest takeaways, because I just hadn't heard it said that way, and the wonderful panelist who was up, um, she spoke first person present about, what does it mean to be a high performer? And look,
Mm.
I'm mixed. High performer
Mhm.
is all about the hours and the weekends and the nights. And, there was a time in my life I might have been a workaholic. I don't know. I don't want to admit to it, but it's true. Um, and what I found interesting, because I just hadn't had a Z tell me this way, in this way, is, she said, we, myself, my team of Z and her organization, we're not impressed because you work long hours. In fact, it makes us think you're not very good at your job because why can't you
Right.
get it done during the hours that you have? And I mean, maybe there's a little hyperbole in there, but I'll say what's interesting, it woke me up a minute because they're about efficiency first, and they've been using all the tools and all the AIs and all the things through school and then into the workplace to the extent that they know if you give them a time and a deadline, they're going to be done with something and they're going to give you their output. And if there's more time, yes, they will use more time to go back and perfect and deepen whatever work that might have been. But they also see a deadline as a deadline. And then they also know that this is the time I've got and I'm going to make this time work.
Mhm.
Also, if you
Mhm.
compare their work on probably a lot of these tools, they're going to be faster than me as X, even though I use them every day myself. I mean, this is just like, fish to water for them. So I feel like it's interesting because we're always so proud of being high performers and proud of ourselves based on, the schedules we keep and how we do our jobs. But to just that one point stuck out to me a lot. And then their real goal truly of finding community in ways that feel native to them. So she described, you know, being on camera at work at her desk with another employee who's on camera at their desk because she doesn't have anyone else around her to work next to, and they just work in parity alongside each other. I mean, it's kind of the company they keep, and that's how they
Yeah.
studied. That's how they went to school. That's how, so they didn't go to classrooms. So it's almost like if you took back when I was in college and we just went to the library and we all sat at a big table and everybody kind of studied their own thing. And sometimes it was what you studied, but mostly you're just camped out hanging out for the late nights before the test or something. They do that naturally online. And if they're one person in an office or one person in a role or they're remote or something, they're probably going to have someone else on their screen just working alongside them. And that helps them stay motivated and engaged. And that was another really interesting takeaway that I did not have.
Yeah, it's I'm always, um, I guess, impressed by, uh, Gen Z, and I always kinda try to think about it from a different perspective, and or I guess I'm doing a poor job of articulating this. I'm deeply interested in Gen Z in the workplace as it relates to Gen Z being the biggest cohort of consumer base today, and and this
Mm.
is a really impressive subject in how to all the points that you just made about how they show up and want to work in the workplace, but they're also serving their peers in a sense, right? As the consumer on this side of the business. And so all those things they appreciate about business, these people appreciate about commerce. And it's a very interesting moment in time to see how customer service and other things play out in our culture.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to make one final statement about this because I think you and I can relate to this in a different way. But the other comment that really struck me, and again, having worked on the people side of the business too for a long time, I loved how this session brought home the fact that when looking at coming to work and interviewing someone for a job, interviewing a Z, if you haven't recently, or, one of the criticisms that can emerge about those interviews, and I've heard them myself, is they're not passionate enough. I want their passion. I want them to love the industry. I want their passion. And I honestly have to call BS on that too, because I have to tell you, I did show up with some passion because back in our day, our parents, ourselves are like, we're going to be so passionate so we get this job. We need this job and we can't say anything wrong or negative, and we've got to show with the shine. So I love that. As an ex, I'm all about the shine. But with Z, what was interesting in this context of her describing this criticism at Hire is she said, our passion may first come from need, and you're not going to see that, but we need a job. I need this job, and then my passion will build as I know more about the job. I'm not just going to take
Mm.
what you say about the job as true, or I'm not going to know if I want the job. Or I don't know. And I think with Z, what's interesting, they really question, am I going to be the right fit for that job terms of skill and specifically that? Because again, being in a different setting and working in the world after maybe more online learning and such, what are my skills? How do I demonstrate them? So there is an element where this panelist said, yeah, we might even need a little handholding at first because we're acclimating to a more real time world, real space world, in some ways about work and output. And so some of what you perceive as maybe a lack of passion is just reticence on, can I do this? And, a good ex that I am, I was taught to, you sell that you are the perfect fit for this job, right?
That's
I
right.
mean,
That's
that's
right.
not the Z mentality. That's not, they're going to tell you if they don't think they're the right fit, or they're going to question their fit in front of you for the skill set I'm talking about. And what's interesting too is that, if we all think about ourselves, and certainly most of us, myself included, join this industry out of happenstance and need. And I did not think I would be in it over 30 years, right? I mean, it was, I need a job. This looks good. I've done this. I've, leasing or whatever I fell into to pay the bills, and then management on site. Those kind of just happened along the way. And, so how I maybe showed a passion in the interview, but how much passion did I have all the way through? I don't know. But, this idea of having to see that, and I do hear that that's often a criticism of Z, that people like, I just want more passion out of them. They're just probably more authentic and real about it and saying, I need this job and I definitely want to be good at it. I want feedback. I want you to like what I'm doing. But the passion will grow over time. I'm here and don't know how it's going to work out.
I love that. You know what I love in that is vulnerability. People, showing up, being vulnerable, and just telling you the truth. And not that
Hmm.
doing a presentation and being passionate in the old form or fashion was wrong. It's just a
No,
different
you're
people.
100% right. That's
Yeah,
100% what it is. We weren't used to being allowed to be vulnerable. I mean, if you were too
yeah,
vulnerable, you're not getting the job.
yeah. That's right. That's right. Well, those are your little things. Well, I want to let's segue from the youth that is making their way into the multifamily space to a legend. You had the opportunity to in cap the entire session or entire event rather with Cindy Clare from Bell Partners. I thought you did a masterful job. Kind of talk to us about the way you facilitated that, the topic, and sitting on stage with Cindy.
Well, one, I mean, yeah, Cindy Clare, and I'm a big fan, and definitely it was wonderful to have her really get to speak to this concept that we were talking about, which is no time to lead. I mean, COO of Bell Partners, 80,000 units, coast to coast, third party, lots of things going on. And I know because I've tried multiple times over years and, being together for other events, her time is precious and you know, it's sometimes hard to get time on her calendar, but she makes time and she's very intentional about making the time and making the effort. And I think that was really at the heart of the session. There were so many things that we talked about around leadership and kind of the value of highest and best use work. And I think that is something in my own executive coaching I spend a lot of time on. I find people get into traps that pull them away from their best use, the best ROI that they provide. And there's some real key ones that she was able to speak to in her own experience as she was making her way up to COO, and even today as COO of this large organization. That she's able to talk about how you keep certain things sacred on your time and how easy it can be to be pulled if you're unintentional. So I think intentional leadership was at the heart of it. And importantly, beware of certain traps. And, there's first the busyness trap. And I think in a lot of organizations, there is, again, this false credibility and even a little bit of ego that comes from I'm busy all
Mhm.
the time. I'm wanted everywhere. I'm needed everywhere. Oh my gosh, I haven't had a day off in weeks and I've all these things. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes, work is work and it's a busy, busy time. But I think that's a false idea that we really have to change in the industry, particularly after just having talked about Z and what they're going to put up with and not put up with around all this extra wasted time. So this kind of false slap on the back, pat on the back we give ourselves if we're just always available, always needed. And the reality is if you're always available, you're teaching people that you're always available. And
That's
she
right.
covered that, whether it be her owners or at 10 o'clock at night, they're wanting something from, her fee management business. And yes, if it's one of the big ones, like we used to call fire flood or blood or something, yeah, be on the phone, talk to them, make sure everything's fine. That's what we're there for. But if it's like, can I get another copy of this? Or it didn't come through. I need the financials. What do you think this is going to be? And questions that no, no, you can get it tomorrow. We'll get it to you tomorrow. This is my personal time. And that seems like a small thing, but it's really not when you add it up. And it seems like more and more we fall trapped to just saying yes to who we think is important. If it's not fee management and it's owned, it could be your owner or your if it's REIT, you can always say that you've got folks to quarter over quarter returns and getting stuff done that can be a lot of pressure. But reality is you really set the schedule on your availability and you waste your time with things that don't deserve your time. And I think that's the other big thing. So meetings are a number one. Everybody knows that meetings can suck you dry of time and energy and life if you're just falling into them.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times in my executive coaching, that's one of the main things that I address is what meetings do you have this week? How do you set meetings? Do you know what the meeting's about before you get there? I can't tell you.
Mm.
I've made a fortune on just helping people figure out to know what the meeting's going to be about before you get to the meeting. How can you be effective? How can you be effective if you don't know? If you don't have a plan, if you don't have a point of view, if you don't have questions, particularly at these leader levels, you're not there just to do everybody else's work. And that's the other trap. The editing,
Mm,
correcting, do it my way kind of work, where truthfully, is their way still good and effective? It may not be your exact way. And I think as you continue to level up, I see leaders who get stuck, and we talked about this in the session, sometimes with just the redo of others' work, or
mm,
interjecting and, kind of getting in the way of the work more than adding value. So there's all kinds of ways that our value is A, given or B, taken away based on how we lead intentionally with our time. And, I started the session by saying if calendar invites were a measure of success, we'd all be winning because we've got more calendar invites than we know what to do with. But that's not how we win. And then the last thought on that session with her when we walked through all these examples and got all the examples from the room. I mean, you were there, all the tables, had discussion and fed back to the room. We learned a lot. But it's really, if you look at your calendar as the indicator of your value and your priority, what does it say about your leadership? And that's really it in a nutshell. And it's a question I ask all my clients that I work with because I'm like, what do you see on? Tell me, read me your calendar. I want to see it. Read it to me. What's going on today through the end of the week? And then sometimes I understand we take meetings that maybe we shouldn't be in, but we're training someone or we've got a concern. I get it. But often there's these invitations to meeting that because you have a title or because you're in a certain role or because someone wants you there, you show up. And that's not highest and best use work. That's also not your best return on investment. So managing meetings is one of the main reasons. There's many others that get in the way, these traps of, liking to be the fixer, liking to be the problem solver. And sometimes
that's
it
right.
feels really good to show all 30 years of your knowledge to have other people think, oh, you're so smart and you just solved it for me. I love that. Thank you. And that's an ego issue that people have to reflect on personally. But, we all have done it. I've done it. We've all made those mistakes, but making sure that we're really doing our highest and best use work.
Definitely. Those are all great points, and I think that session being the end cap of the entire event was so appropriate, in in allowing people to walk away with things that were completely actionable from the second they walked out of the room, right? The next invite you get, you could potentially say, "Nope, I'm not going to that, and here's why," but, it's not the highest and best use of my time, certainly potentially not highest and best use of your opportunity to grow as a leader and being in it by yourself, so, Jonathan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, whether it be in real life or second time around here on the Multifamily Collective. Where can people learn more about you, and get in touch with you if they want to?
Thank you. Well, my name is on the screen here. So Jonathan Osteen Consulting .com will get you to my website. You also can email me from there. Um, and always there's LinkedIn where I have my profile and there's ways to link to me there. Always welcome to hear from folks who are interested. And thank you for the opportunity, Mike.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll link all of that information up in the show notes. Jonathan, thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mike. Great time.